It's 7 o'clock. It's time to rock. The PTC meeting is called to order. First item of business is establishing a quorum, and with the removal, I don't know what the right word is. Resignation withdrawn.
Withdrawal.
We are all present with all the active commissioners. Next is public comment for things that are not on the agenda. Is there anybody here to speak on something not on the agenda? This is the time you would hand me your green card. You would step to the mic. Because, great. Randy, and it's Craig?
Cree is how I say it, yes.
Okay.
I'm representing BPAC. It's my night to attend. I see there's nothing on the agenda of any particular note to BPAC, but I'm here if you need me.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Thank you. I will now close public comments not on the agenda. And the next thing is items for consideration of action, which is the consent calendar. As was noted, there is an updated version of the minutes that was on the dais with two minor corrections. One was that the E was missing in my last name on the motion, and the second that Commissioner Junaid reported that this was her last meeting due to her no longer living in Los Altos. So those two corrections were made and revised.
Motion to approve as amended.
Wait.
Correction also. We were talking about the one where we list, each of us would list the issues we have with the leadership project.
Wait, are you talking about the?
Special meeting.
I'm talking about there's the study session, and then there's the meeting that we had. So the meeting that we had is this one. That's the one that we're talking about first.
Okay, so my comment is the
Other one, okay. So are there any corrections noted?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Do you guys have all that? Any more comment?
Going to just do one motion for both? Or?
No.
One motion for each.
Okay.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? So the motion passes unanimously. The second thing is the study session minutes.
My one change where it says concerned about parking, I'd like to change it to concerned about inconsistent application of parking requirements. It's not that I don't think that they're parking. My issue that I brought up was that city was allowing them to use residential parking for retail when we have specifically not done that for other similar projects.
We want to say that again.
You may want to say that again. So
Revise, instead of saying concerned about parking, say concerned about inconsistent application of parking requirements. What I don't want the applicant to have to do is they get the okay that they can use residential parking for retail and then come back and have that switched on them.
any other I have a correction. So I don't know if it's important, but when I said look at the view from San Antonio Road, I gave two specific locations. One was at Lokes, and the other was at El Camino Real. So I just want to make sure it's not just anywhere on San Antonio, but specifically where the ARCO station is, and then so that you can see it from Chef Chu's behind it. And I don't know if I said the reduced blank walls on the sides. I think I talked about that the two sides that's eventually there might be a building there. So to be aware of that. I don't think I wouldn't say that. I was more be aware that there might be a three-story building going on both sides of that building, and just to be aware of it, try to make the focus towards the sides, but more towards the ends, because that's what you're going to look out if there was a three-story building next to you.
So be aware of possible future adjacent development?
Right. And focus on the views from I don't know what to say, the east and west.
Focus on the other sides.
Yeah, the smaller sides that are facing the alley and the street. Any other changes?
I move we accept the minutes.
Is there a second? Do you guys get that? Any more comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Rolling right along. Next item of discussion is the pastoral investments 110 and 129 First Street common parking license agreement. Zach, take it away.
Yes, good evening, Chair, members of the Commission. This item before you is a proposed common or shared parking agreement between the properties at 129 First Street and 110 First Street. As outlined in the code, there is a provision that allows for a common parking agreement when a property is within 300 feet of the proposed off-site parking location. Historically, this has been handled administratively and prepared in a form that's reviewed and approved by planning and the city attorney. However, as was included in the bundle of code amendments, which came before the commission back in July, I believe, we did update that to require Planning and Transportation Commission review and approval of such an agreement. And so while the code amendment does not go into effect until the beginning of October, in the spirit of abiding by this requirement, staff has referred this to the commission for your consideration. And really the goal is, one, to allow for the public to be aware, review, and comment on a proposed common parking agreement. And then the other one would be, as outlined in the findings, for the commission to review the agreement and make sure that it complies with the intent, both in terms of being within 300 feet and complying with the intent of the city's parking requirements as outlined in Chapter 1474. So in this case, the building at 129 First Street, formerly Forest on First, it was renovated and improved as a restaurant. They don't have a specific tenant, at least have not conveyed that to me, but they are looking to increase the existing shared parking agreement between 129 and 110 to allow for up to 13 spaces to be used. This would allow for additional seats and employees to be operate in the restaurant in the evenings and on the weekends. So as noted here, 110 First Street is a mixed-use building. Its hours of operation are 9 to 5. It's closed in the evenings and on the weekends, and so the restaurant is seeking to use their empty parking spaces during this time to provide for a restaurant use with additional tables and chairs, since there are only 6 on-site spaces at this location. So based on that, there are several conditions that staff has incorporated to ensure that we don't end up with a parking conflict, basically looking to make sure that if the hours of operation change at 110 First Street, there is flexibility, as there are, I believe, 52 parking spaces in their underground parking garage, so there could still be operations, but any change would need to be evaluated to ensure that there's still sufficient parking for both uses. And then based on the number of employees, that dictates the number of chairs that the restaurant could have. And so really that goes through. And the other one that we're looking at is, since the parking is at the rear of the restaurant at 129, including a sign somewhere along their frontage, and this would be in a form reviewed and approved by planning, to ensure that cars driving up would know to either go toward 110 or go into the alley behind, thus minimizing the likelihood that they park in other locations if they're going specifically to this restaurant. So with the recommended conditions and findings, staff is recommending that the Planning and Transportation Commission approve this proposed common parking agreement.
So I wanted to remind everybody, if you haven't done already, please turn off your cell phone or put it on vibrate so it doesn't disrupt the meeting. Is there somebody here from Passerelle?
I have a question for staff.
Oh, sorry.
I do too.
So I note that in the conditions that Monday through Friday before 5 p.m., First Street is allowed to use 2 parking spaces at 110 First Street. Of course, things change after 5, which I don't see a problem with, but if they're allowed, if 129 First Street is allowed to use 2 parking spaces at 110 before 5, does it change the parking ratio requirements that 129 would have to have for its present parking square footage in the building?
Right now, 129 First Street has 6 on-site parking spaces, and as part of the tenant improvements for the restaurant, they did execute a shared parking agreement to allow them to use 2 parking spaces over at 110 for employee parking. Basically, their intent was they had agreed to have up to 18 chairs, which would account for the 6 spaces on-site, and then up to 3 employees. Technically, they could go up to 6 with 2 spaces, and then those employees would use the parking spaces at 110 First Street. 110 First Street has a surplus of, I believe, 5 spaces, and so that's why those 2 parking spaces are able to be fully dedicated to 129 and without impacting the existing building at 110, if that makes sense.
I'm wondering why, if they have a surplus of 5, why the applicant is only asking for 2.
I will defer to the applicant to answer that
Yeah,
question.
I will.
That is an existing agreement that's on the books right now. This new agreement would replace this, thus maintain the existing 2 that's already on the books, and then add the additional 13 after 5 and on the weekends.
Can you, I didn't see any discussion about what ratio and calculation you were using. I saw that, 13 spots would get them this number of chairs, but presuming they're also adding in their 6 spots, or is it 7, are you assuming they have 19 spots? And what calculation are you using to even get to that requirement?
I was using both the 6 on-site and the 13 off-site. That's how, if you look at condition number 2.
So what are you calculating as their number of seats and number?
Is it like 3 per 1,000?
What's the
4 per
ratio you're using?
What's your formula?
Okay, so the code requires that for you have 1 parking space for every 3 seats in a restaurant and 1 space for every 3 employees.
Okay, now, how many of these are outdoor versus indoor?
That isn't specified. We just count total chairs.
So that's my question. Since when does the city count outdoor seating in doing these calculations?
We're requiring it for this restaurant. This building was originally approved with a parking variance back in 2005, 2006 for Styler's floors. And in that case, when the building was approved, it was limited to extensive retail uses only, and any other use other than an extensive retail would have to comply with parking. And so in this case, when the restaurant came in, that was a condition of approving the tenant improvements for a restaurant was that they fully park all their chairs.
I guess the bigger question is there any other restaurant that has to park their outdoor seating in the city?
Not that I'm aware of that's outside the parking district. Because within the parking district, we
So like
don't.
Voyager did not have to park their outdoor seating?
At that point, we had looked at them, it was restaurants as a permitted use, and so we had not gotten into the chair analysis. We had looked at, this was an existing square footage, and restaurant use was was a permitted use in the CRS zoning.
There is one restaurant down at Foothill Crossing, the Red Pepper, when we amended the use permit, back when they established restaurants over 20 seats required a use permit, which is no longer the case now, but then that was, and so we did a parking analysis for expansion.
I think we need to go back a little bit to the history, Renee. This was a Styler's Carpets, and the parking was all in front. And when Styler's decided to move to a different part of Los Altos, and it was turned into a restaurant, they wanted to use the parking as part of the restaurant. So originally, where the outdoor seating was parking, and that was the whole point.
How many spots?
Oh, it probably had 7 or 8, maybe, plus some
There were two.
disabled spots, maybe.
There were 2 spaces in the front and 5 in the back. When they reconfigured, they were able to add a space in the back because they closed the loading bay, but then they did lose 1 net space. So they went from 7 total on-site down to 6 total on-site.
I think the front was configured so they could have the ADA parking.
Yeah, the ADA parking
ADA
was in the
parking.
front, so there was an ADA space, a ramp, and a second
Yeah, right.
space.
It was-
Because we actually were concerned that they were going to put the ADA space in the back, which felt like second-class citizens, so
Right.
we had them, at the time of approval, put it in the front.
But there was quite a discussion about parking at the time.
But
when
that
building
was, but that
redone.
was the old building, right?
It
That
was,
when
it was,
it was a carpet. It's one of
Right.
Styler's Carpets.
So they're not included in the parking district at all?
No.
They're not.
they're not.
Even though you could throw a stone to,
John?
Do you have more questions, Renee?
So what I didn't understand is the 13 spots, are they dedicated only during the hours from 5 PM on, or they're excess, so really all day they're?
They're dedicated from 5 PM on and on the weekends because they don't have 13 additional spaces when that building is in use.
Got it.
So that gives them 39 additional seats,
Yes.
right?
So that's how, when you look at condition 2, the 48 chairs and up to 9 employees, or 51 chairs and up to 6 employees, that parking is accounted for both on-site and off-site at 110 First Street.
John, do you have more questions? John?
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. So tell me how the parking is going to work at 110. There's an upper parking lot and a lower parking lot. The lower parking lot has a gate. When I was just there a couple of minutes ago, the gate was not down, but is that gate down on weekends? Is it down at 7 o'clock at night?
The intent is they would use the surface parking, not the lower level parking.
Okay, so I went there, and at 6:40, there were 5 cars parked on the upper level, and if my count is correct, there are 13 available spots, 2 charging stations, and 2 handicap spots. So I'm trying to understand how there are 13 spots that are available if 5 are taken at 6:40 at night.
I'll defer to the applicant there may need to be some adjustment of how those are used, but I guess the question would be, are those cars associated with, and if that's the case, is the building in use after 5 p.m., which would be different from the statement that was
Yeah.
provided.
Wait
by
a
the
minute.
applicant.
According to the diagram, there are 18 spots. If 5 of them were taken, you still have 13.
But there's charging stations, and 3 of them are,
Yeah, but a charging station is, people can park there with cars. I mean, electric cars, and so I see that as a viable space, but that's for discussion. never
Well,
mind.
I
Just doing-
counted 17, so,
And just in general, whether it's an ADA space or not, it counts toward, because, obviously, that's always part of any number of parking that you provide.
so John, are you saying that the parking schematic that was given is not right?
well, I don't know. I counted, and maybe, are there 3 handicap spots?
According to
That's
the
what they
diagram,
say.
there are.
Are there?
Yeah.
I don't know, I didn't look.
Then I'm wrong. Then in fact, they're 18. But my question is, if for a building that's supposed to be closed at 5 o'clock at night, there are
Cars there.
there are 5 cars there, and I just did that tonight, and I can go back another night and check, but at 6:40 at night, and there were also cars in the lower parking lot. So I'm trying to understand how this is going to work, because it raises a question in my mind. The next question is, and again, this may be for the applicant, is what's the enforcement that the city is going to do relative to parking and whatever parking, making sure parking at 110 is available? What are the city going to do, or the applicant going to do, to enforce parking in the rear of 129? In the past, the Forest on First, the employees all parked in the rear. And in fact, the employees parked in the rear and parked in the handicap parking. I know because I checked on that numerous times, because they were clearly abusing the system. So does the city plan to do any kind of enforcement or requirement relative to employee parking?
To my knowledge, the city does not do any parking enforcement on private parking lots.
Okay. Okay. And is there an expectation that employees will be parking where? On 110 or 129?
The expectation would be that they park at 110.
Okay. So we could make that as a requirement.
Yes.
And what kind of teeth does that requirement have if they violate it?
Ultimately, the city does have the power to revoke a shared parking agreement.
All right.
I have another question.
Okay. But I guess I'm still confused. If you've got 3 handicapped spots and 5 people parking, and the people who go to that parking lot aren't handicapped, where are they going to park?
That's an issue at any parking lot where a certain number of required spaces are ADA, and so theoretically, if you don't have any handicapped or accessible cars there, you would be short, but that's the nature of any parking.
But the ratio of the ADA parking in this particular instance is clearly bias to putting the ADA parking on the first level, not the lower level.
Yes.
I think it really would be more incumbent that the applicant knows that once this goes into effect, they need to keep those spaces free and clear. At this point, they don't, so I can defer to the
Okay,
applicant
all right.
in terms of how.
I'm sorry if I'm nitpicking, I realize I am, but we've gotten snookered a number of times on people saying what they were going to do, and they haven't done it, including the former owners of this particular property,
The tenants, you mean?
the tenants, excuse me. Okay, those are the questions I have for now.
Nope.
Is there another question?
One last
Nate?
question. Did the city consider or broach discussions of some sort of in lieu agreement so that they could actually operate at whatever capacity they wanted and do some sort of arrangement like the Grill did?
I think that's a good question.
Because it seems like they would probably want to operate more hours and with the, total intensity that they could. It seems like that would
This
be
is
a
a
good
different
solution.
This is a different situation in the Grill in that you don't have a plaza directly adjacent to it, and obviously there's other discussions, but there's no actual in lieu program in effect, and so the city's approach was you have to abide by the conditions of the lot, or in this case they sought to propose this common parking agreement, but no, that was not discussed.
I'd like to add a fact, just so you know, that there is a thing that happens when you go above 49 seats in a restaurant. It changes the requirements from the health department for grease traps and all kinds of expensive stuff, which is why sometimes you find restaurants, they say occupancy is 49. And so I think when we're looking, as you're saying, Renita, what would they want to do? They might want to do more in the lunchtime hour, I agree, but I don't think they'd want to go over the 49 seats in the evening because I'm not sure the building complies.
Any other questions? The applicant? You have 10 minutes to speak,
If you want.
if you want. So you need to,
You have to go to the microphone
Yeah.
because otherwise the people watching on TV can't understand you.
or the web.
My name is Joan, I'm with Passerelle, and I just want to answer one of your questions regarding the parking lot. Currently, the parking lot is mainly used for the building tenants, and the reason we proposed the shared parking agreement is to attract reputable restaurant operators to come to downtown Los Altos. And then we have this beautiful restaurant built at 129. Unfortunately, the previous tenant did not work out. So we want to correct and also, be the good citizen and then meet all the parking requirements. And that's why we come up with this idea and share our extra parking that we have at 110 mainly is used for office tenants. And we hardly have any usage during after business hours. And then, so to answer your question, is right now we have 5 cars, like you said. You saw 5 cars parked on the surface parking lot. And then when we have this agreement approved, and then we usually will notify the tenant, retail tenant. They are mainly used by the retail tenants. So they will be using the office, the underground parking level, since office tenants usually get off around 6 o'clock, and then most of the time, the underground parking garage is pretty empty. So we will have the retail tenant and their guests park in the underground parking lot. And then our gate usually, right now, we're currently scheduled to close the gate at 8 o'clock. And then, so when we have this agreement approved, we will have the garage scheduled to close at 5:30, and just to give people some time to move their car to the underground, so leave the surface parking lot open to the restaurant. Did I answer your question?
So the gate will be closed at what
At
time?
5:30, and then the tenant has a remote control. They have the way to get in and out. And then when you're a guest, since you parked in the underground parking, when you move to the gate will automatically open. They don't need to have any remote control to.
And you're going to require all your tenants after 5 or 5:30 to park in the lower level?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I have questions, I don't know, I want to make sure that everybody else has a chance.
Go ahead.
Oh, so I'm confused, because what you're saying is that if they're a retail client and they have somebody come after 5:30, the gate's going to be down, so that means they're going to be parking on the surface parking?
Right now, their business hours is 9 to 5 o'clock. If they do have a private appointment, like after hours, and they usually will give access to the guests.
Okay.
And sometimes they will park on the street, sometimes they will park at the parking lot next to our building at Safeway, since it's also a public parking.
So you're saying that the retail operations will close at 5 o'clock?
Yes.
Essentially?
Yeah, unless they have a private appointments. So
And
that's-
then my other questions are, we have this attachment C, I don't know if you know what that looks like.
Yes.
And so on the signage, I had two things that I wasn't clear about. I just wanted to ask if that was what your intent was, or whether that was just an idea, which is, it said, one sign says that there's a voucher that must be attended from an attendant. So does that mean you're going to have an attendant there all the time?
We're trying to run it on an honor system.
Okay.
I think this is a really quiet, peaceful town, and it hardly has any foot traffic at nighttime. And so at the beginning, we're going to try it just to open the parking lot to the guests, restaurant guests. And then if we do find the systems being, taken advantage of,
Right.
then we probably will hire on-site parking attendants to, monitor the parking needs. And the guests will be showing a proof of receipt from across the street, and then so to validate the.
So these are signs that you will put up, but you won't necessarily enforce them at the start?
Well, at the beginning, we're probably going to just to see how the traffic goes, and then if the restaurant's going well, they're really packed, and so we want to hire a parking assistant just to monitor the.
And then my other question was that on the signage, and I believe this would be your question, not staff, but it seemed to me that on First Street, the sign is faced towards Forest, or towards the restaurant, and I don't know if that's access, because this might be a Zach question or a staff question, is if I'm driving on First Street, I'd kind of want to see the sign, like perpendicular rather than parallel to the street. And right now, it looks like that the street would be parallel beyond that gate.
We can also, since we're actually, we cannot do anything until we have this future tenant secured.
Right.
So once we have the tenant secure, we probably will have this restaurant tenant to put out a sign perpendicular or in the angle on the sidewalk, and so the driver can see it in a better way, but
Right.
not blocking the sidewalk.
Right, that's why I think it's staff, right? That's all public. This is all city right away, not necessarily the restaurant. So how would that work?
Yeah, we would work with them to issue an outdoor display permit, similar to other restaurants for A-frames or chairs outside, but the goal being that obviously you need to maintain at least 5 feet of clear
Right.
along the sidewalk.
And then that signage would say that there's parking available behind the restaurant as well as across on 110.
Yes.
Right. That was my questions. Any other questions?
Thanks.
Thanks. Now it's the time for public comment. I have one speaker. Does anybody else like to speak? Please give me a green card. Otherwise, Roderick Newman, you're on. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm here primarily because my wife and I live on 2nd Street, yet our patio and our front entrance is actually on the alley directly behind Forest on First. And, when I heard about this, I'm feeling that empty parking spots across the way at 110 might alleviate some of the cars driving around in the back, and maybe some noise in the evening. So I think it's a decent solution, in my opinion, and hopefully that attracts another restaurant to Los Altos.
Are you currently disturbed by, or when Forest on First was in business, were you disturbed by the traffic in the back?
It could be a little bit busy in the daytime, and kids are loud, but, we're fine with that. The thing is, if there's another solution to alleviate some of the just driving to see if there are spots in the evenings is kind of the thought that my wife and I were having. That would be, if that was more public knowledge for their customers. And certainly if staff parks in the back on the alley, or if they have designated spots, anything to help with the parking situation, which I understand is important. So, yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So seeing no other person that wants to speak from public, I will close public comment and open it up for discussion. We'll start on this side.
So, I'm personally in favor of shared parking when it makes sense. I think it's a good thing to be doing. The devil is always in the detail, however. It sounds like most aspects of this have been thought through relative to signage, relative to the tenants at 110. I would want to see a condition, number 6, that the employees must park at 110, certainly after 5:30. So that the people who go to the restaurant and circle around will find a parking spot. And I'm hoping that the restaurant employees will not do what the Forest on First people did, which was park in back and park in handicap spots and do things like that. With that condition, I'm okay with it. Obviously, making sure that they abide by the rules, and particularly the rules relative to the number of seats in the restaurant is going to be important, because, again, we've seen abuse of that, and I don't think that's very good. I'm going to make one comment which is not on point, particularly to this application, but I think it's warranted, which is, when Passerelle came to town, we all had high hopes and expectations that they were going to be part of the solution to the vibrancy of this town, and there certainly have been a number of good things that have happened, but I was deeply disappointed walking down First Street earlier today to see that there are too many ghost town properties that are owned by Passerelle. And it really hurts all the good things that we as a community have done to get more residential building in downtown. And if Passerelle wants to buy buildings and keep them vacant, that really hurts the vibrancy of that part of town. And I hope that message gets to Mrs. Google and crew.
So I can support John's sixth condition, and with that, I am quite happy that we have someone who is making an effort to comply, because the previous tenant was so flagrant in their abuse that it was offensive on many levels. And I look forward to having more people walking at night, because that's what we're looking for. And if you have a restaurant that basically is a dinner restaurant, that would be very nice. So look for one that has really good food, please, and then I can support this application.
Sure.
I'm in favor of shared parking. I also know some of the contiguous owners of this property that have office use that I would think if you needed additional parking, might be susceptible. I can't speak for them, of course, but I know if I was there, I have an office building downtown. I get approached often by people that want to use my parking during the day. Well, of course, that doesn't work for me. No one's ever approached me and said, what about at night? But you have office buildings that are contiguous to you that have lots of parking, that if you needed additional ones, I would suggest going to them as well and saying, hey, what about 4 or 5 of your parking spaces that don't get used? So anyways, I think this is a good solution.
I'm also in support of this for a number of reasons. You know, this is a 2,600 square foot restaurant. In my mind, it's grossly overparked. The ratio, 57 spaces means that they are parking 22 spaces for every 1,000 square foot. And now that I've been on the parking subcommittee, other towns are doing 8 to 10 for a restaurant. So the fact that we're requiring them to do 22, if you're wondering why Los Altos doesn't have a lot of restaurants, it's because of this ratio. And we're not going to have them until this changes. And I'm hopeful that we will. It's just unreasonable and outrageous and inconsistent with every other town. Also, I don't believe, Los Altos, I think, has not counted outdoor seating. I don't know how Red Pepper Restaurant got so unlucky that they had to count them, but if we are going to count them, we should count them for everybody, and we don't. So That's another reason why I think it's grossly overparked, and I think we should be encouraging outdoor seating. I think it creates vibrancy. It creates this pedestrian experience where you see people out. It's, in my mind, a public benefit and desirable, and it should not be counted, worthy of encouraging. And then finally, this is a poster child case for why we need a parking in lieu program. This restaurant should be open all hours of the day at capacity, and the only way they can do it is if we have a parking in lieu program. So all of this to say is this stuff is coming. These proposals to change the ratios and to create parking in lieu program and to encourage outdoor seating are coming. And what I would say to the applicant, if they're watching, is that these numbers will change, and if these ratios do get changed, you will be able to have more seats. So you should plan, and the city should, I wish there's a way to incorporate this, that this agreement is in effect as long as these city ordinances are, the way they are. But once they change, they should be the first people that come in because they will be able to have greater capacity. And then my last comment about the jibe against Passerelle is that I completely disagree. They have brought vibrancy in a huge way to this town. I mean, Skateworks, Tin Pot, Honcho, California Closets I saw just opened. I just passed that today. I mean, the stuff that they're bringing, I can't think of any other landowner who is trying to bring so much to so many different places. So if you're wondering why they haven't put residential, it's because they can't. They can't park it. So until we change the code or give them an opportunity through a parking in lieu, they're not going to build because they can't. Unless they can do 3 stories and 30 feet, which is also another controversial issue, it's not going to happen. So if you want to see it, don't blame the Passerelle people. It's us that needs to make those changes. So for all of those reasons...
They're keeping office buildings empty that they've bought. They're empty.
One building.
Huh?
Could we either consider that
That's not relevant to the motion.
It's irrelevant to all of this.
I feel strongly that what they're doing has been beneficial. I like what I'm seeing downtown. I think it started a trend. If you want to see more, then we have
Fix
to
the
do
parking.
more.
Anything else?
No.
No? Ken?
I very strongly support this, except I cannot support what John was proposing for the following reason, that when a restaurant is going to open at 5 o'clock, it means that the people who prepare the food and get the restaurant ready have to be there before 5 o'clock. And I believe that and partly because of what our guest speaker mentioned, that the employees should in fact park in the back, and as many as possible of the guests should park in the auxiliary parking across the street. I don't think insisting that the employees park across the street is the right thing to do at all, because that means the employees can't go there until 5 o'clock, and that's when the restaurant is going to open. So I think that's the wrong thing to do, and I will not support that amendment.
You do realize that you're talking about one space?
What?
The parking ratio, right, Zach, that for every 3 employees, there
Well,
has
they
to be
can
one
have as many,
space.
they can have
So
as
the
many
2
as
dedicated
nine
spaces.
employees, right? You
But-
can have as many as 9 employees.
But that's only 3 spaces.
Right. And they should
And the
be
6
able to park
space,
in the
and the
back.
6 employees that are there
Right.
are supposed to use the 2 spaces that are across 110. I just want to make sure you understand that. Okay. Any other-
What John wanted to do was have a condition that required them to do that. What I'm saying is, I don't want to support a condition that requires them to do that.
So, but I have a question if you can. So if you want to have them park in back, then the signage should say there is no parking in back.
No,
You need to
there
park in
may
the
be
front.
there may be parking available in back, but, there's only a few spaces in back in any case. So that the back is going to fill up, and then exactly what our guest was concerned about is going to happen. The back will fill up, and then they'll be driving around in his patio looking for spaces in a place that's filled up, rather than just automatically going across the street where they should.
Right.
So why don't we just say we're going to do that?
I don't disagree with you on that, but that's different than what the what was proposed here, which was to have, they were saying they were going to have employees park across the street and direct most of the people to the parking in the restaurant. And if that was the case, I wanted to make sure that that was enforced. If in fact it makes better sense to do it your way, I understand the rationale, then hopefully that avoids too much traffic down that alleyway.
Right.
Which is a perfectly reasonable thing to be doing.
Right. And furthermore, if the employees have to park across the street, as for any kind of a restaurant, the employees, when I frequently, the reason I know this is I frequently will go over to the Los Altos Grill and make an early appointment with the employees to give me a call when there's a table available, because I live close enough that I can just be there in 5 minutes. And they're often there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The cooks are preparing the food, and it doesn't really open until 5 or 6. So they're there for a number of hours ahead of time. So you can't have a restaurant that opens at 5 and expect employees to magically appear at 5 o'clock. Not going to happen. So that was my point.
Do you have anything else?
Nope.
Because I have this is something I noticed with Forest on First, which was there were 6 supposed spots in the back. One of them had trash cans in it, so there were really 5. And as John and I noted, most of the time those 5 spots were filled with employees. So now you have 2 spots that were supposed to be for employees, but really it requires 5. So I'm with Renee in the sense that the code doesn't make sense. And I don't know how, I mean, you can't enforce, I mean, if all people that are those 6 employees all drive a car, then where are the 4 people parking? And I don't know if that's an ongoing thing with almost every establishment I know.
In general, that's the minimum parking required. That doesn't say that only 2 employees can drive. That's setting the basis for how many parking spaces are needed. We're not enforcing how those spaces are used or what mix is employee. That's setting the baseline, and that's standard with a lot of different ways to look at a parking. Is you have to set up a ratio to how you want to calculate it if you're looking at employees. Sometimes they all drive, sometimes half of them drive. So you're setting a baseline, because obviously the goal is not to park at the capacity, but provide for parking for, I believe it's 80% of the time or 85% of the time. So yeah, that's not saying that they only are allowed to park 2 or 3 employees. That's just for setting the minimum number of spaces that the code would require.
Because I'm with Renee on being on the parking committee. I think that what I saw at Forest on First was people going and parking in the shared parking lots, walking over because there wasn't any parking behind the building, and there's nothing the city can do to enforce where those people park, essentially. And I'm with you. It's like, I think we've got an issue, and I'm for the shared parking. I think this makes total sense as far as trying to make more public space available. I just don't know how we really manage what really happens without trying to figure out some other way.
Well, Renee's point is that shared parking is a solution, but it's not the solution to the real problem at this point.
Right. Sure. So with that,
A motion?
motion?
Well, I'll do it then, because I said I could support John's additional condition, but I yield to Ken's point that staff will come early, and so I move that we approve application 15D06 at 110 and 129 First Street for the shared parking agreement, subject to the findings and conditions as stated in the staff report.
I'll second.
Can I propose an amendment? Would there be support for some language in here that recognizes that if and when these ratios change, that this will be amended without having to come back, but to account for those changed
kind of my
ratios?
question
Only
for
if we can
staff.
check with staff if that's possible, because that may not be part of our procedures.
The ultimate document is going to be recorded against both properties. And so that can always be amended. It needs to be amended. I mean, so if the parking requirements change, we would evaluate, and if it's able to meet parking in another way, the agreement doesn't need to come back to be approved. It's basically when you have a proposed common or shared parking agreement, it comes before the Planning and Transportation Commission. But it seems perfectly logical that if parking standards change, we could reevaluate that proposed parking arrangement.
And it could be done administratively at the request of the occupants?
That would be the the people.
Or just automatically adjusted
The
according to
agreement wouldn't be
ratios.
changing. 13 spots would still be 13 spots. It would just mean 13 spots equate to that many more
Exactly.
tables.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it would be like the use permit or
It would be a simple
whatever the
thing to do.
restaurant requires. would-
But it would be done administratively, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually 110 First Street's a good example of that. When it was first built, there was a higher parking requirement for office, and that's why they have the surplus that they do now. So they are now able to offer that parking to this property.
What is office ratios now? 3 per
It's,
1,000?
one space per 300 or 3.3 per 1,000.
So Renita, I don't think we need the additional condition.
Pardon me?
I think that when the code changes, it's going to apply unilaterally,
That's what I would think. It would be an automatic.
Retroactive.
retroactively.
Well, it might be unilateral as well. but
And
it is
retroactive.
gonna be
My
retroactive.
point is, if the code changes in the way it seems to be going, which is not to be even related to seat numbers or employee numbers,
Right.
but basically it's just on a square footage, then, 2,600 square feet by a new ratio would just be a different number of spots to be fully parked for the entire building,
Right.
all hours of the day, which they
Right.
conceivably could do.
So once that change, go ahead.
So one way to address this, if you look at condition number 2, it does outline the specific number of chairs and employees. So you could add as a second sentence to that, David was suggesting just something, or as required by the city's current municipal
Required by
code.
the.
Yeah.
By the-
Or some way to just
Right.
reflect that.
If,
Right, because the code will change, I believe, so that it won't be limited to any chairs. It'll say they can utilize,
As you could say, or as currently required by the city's parking regulations or municipal code.
But what we're saying is if that changes.
Right, if the
then-
municipal code
Then
is-
these 48 chairs and 51 chairs and the ratios that are being used to calculate how much parking there is
become, like,
may become mute.
irrelevant.
Right, we can.
We
add
can
a
say,
phrase.
or such ratio as required by municipal code.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the correction.
Yeah.
Is there a second for that?
yeah, I'd second.
Who's going to, Ken's going to second it.
Okay, and I've got a proposed change, or it's
So wait,
either,
I want to make sure, do you guys have that change?
So what I
Yeah, so
said,
it's-
6 employees or such ratios as required by municipal code.
So that's in condition number 2,
Two.
right?
Right.
Okay.
so my question for my fellow commissioners is, if in fact it makes better sense to have the employees parking behind the restaurant, do we ask the applicant or require the applicant to have clear signage in front and in back to first direct people to 110 First Street?
Well, doesn't the actual agreement have to go through staff for, is
That's
this?
what condition 4 says.
Yeah.
Signage, yeah.
So in that case, when it says the restaurant shall provide signage,
Well, where patrons should park, okay, but,
then,
And it will be reviewed and approved by the community development director,
okay.
who I assume,
Who isn't here?
who
is.
will be informed by staff?
So, does that answer your?
Okay, that answers, that's
Okay.
fine. I just,
So is, any more conversation or amendment? No? Is everybody clear what the motion is?
So we need a second to the amendment.
The amendment was
It was
seconded.
seconded by everybody at that side of the table.
Okay, so.
All 4 people.
The maker and
So the maker was,
Me?
was Phoebe.
and the.
I'll second.
And second was Ken.
And there was a modification by
Oh,
By Renee.
Ronit, right?
Jerry was the original second.
I was the original second, but I,
Okay.
Right,
fine.
right. So, and then, so as we were talking
That
about
was the
it,
original amendment.
but you,
I'm not married to it, no.
well, the wording, I don't, so you want to be the
I don't
motion,
really.
somebody made the
who's
motion,
on first?
Ronit made the amendment.
and then Ken seconded,
Ken seconded the amendment.
right, with Phoebe wordsmithing it.
Yeah.
Are we clear?
Group effort, all right.
I'm waiting for the signal.
Jerry needs to accept the amendment.
I accept the amendment.
Okay,
Now we're good.
now we're,
You can vote on the whole thing.
okay, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Motion carries unanimously. All right, with that closes our discussion items. The next item of business is the commissioners' reports and comments. I don't know who was assigned to the last city council meeting.
I was.
And
I was assigned to it. I went to the city council meeting. As you know, I sat next to you, Michael. So, And I was excited to go because two things on the agenda were of interest. One was Loyola Corners, and then the other one was, of course, Abbey's Hotel on.
Hotel, the use
And
permit.
so there were 33 speakers or so from Abbey, only one was negative. And it got passed unanimously by the city council to allow her to, and including the extended hours. And to this, and I can't understand, even now, having been there, why it went to the city council, because they didn't make it.
Well, they did
It seemed
change
to me
it,
like a waste of time, but I don't know.
but they changed it from 7
Yeah.
a.m. that was approved by the PDC to 4 p.m. That was during Monday through Friday.
That's right. That's right. That's the difference.
So did they, I think I did read this, but did they leave it longer hours during weekend?
Yes.
Yes.
Holidays?
Yes, they did.
And weekends is
If she want, I mean.
whatever she wants,
And I
right?
noticed driving by here, there were people out there drinking
Wine,
glasses of
yeah.
wine. And
And so.
I
Loyola-
spoke and Michael spoke.
Yeah. And with Loyola Corners, they said anything was deemed complete by 9/7/8. Because that's when they're going to decide what the moratorium will be, and they need 4 council members to vote, and one of them's on vacation. Anything else?
And there is an application that's
There
in,
is.
according to the town crier.
1540 Miramonte for a mixed-use retail and 4 dwelling units to replace the service station. It's right across the street from the post office there. And we have since deemed the application complete, so that will go forward.
So are they going to be coming before the commission?
They will. They'll be coming on a study session as a
And-
first step.
And any potential moratorium won't affect our decision? Is that what?
That's right.
Okay.
Because it's,
It's
Deemed
deemed
complete.
complete before the moratorium.
Okay. Any other commissioner reports? I did have one item for a future agenda because the bicycle transportation safety in Santa Clara County released this document, of which Los Altos, there's a heat map of all the incidences of the top-ranked intersections for motor vehicle bike collisions with 2 or more collisions from 2009 and 2012.
I hope we don't have too many.
No, actually, there were only 2 areas that were noted.
Okay.
One is at El Sereno Avenue and Grant Road and Homestead Road, which is where Trader Joe's is. There were 4, and at Foothill Expressway and Main Street, there were 2. I've asked for this in the past, to have something like this for the city, and I know that the city manager said that it's a gray area about what to call it, but I'm wondering if we could act on this in a future meeting of just discussing it and just understanding what the city might be doing for these 2 intersections, if it's been brought to the bicycle transportation and safety in Santa Clara County, which is true.
actually, I personally know of 2 collisions at First and Main.
Well, that's why
I mean, I don't know why they don't show up on this.
Perhaps there wasn't a police report.
after 2012.
Can I suggest that we have the bicycle and transportation representative take it back to his commission, discuss it, and then maybe talk to us about ideas of,
Yeah, well, this is the bicycle part. I mean, I'd like to see it for cars as well,
got it.
right? And that's what I think we've asked in the past and haven't got a lot of traction. So if that can be,
You mean automobile accident?
You want the
Yeah.
city to generate that report, is that what you're saying?
the city probably has access to the same information.
Got it.
I just had, this is for bikes. I bet there's the vehicles too. And my suggestion is that at a future meeting, we look at it
And you need some support in order to have that. I can support that.
Yeah, so can I. Yeah. Seems to be more P than T in PTC, isn't there?
Exactly, and that's part of trying to understand some of the traffic issues that are in. And then for the BPAC, I don't know if you've seen this, but you can certainly have it. Yeah, this is Los Altos. I just took the picture of Los Altos. Whoops. It's all the cities. And what's really cool about this, just in a bicycle, because I'm very much an advocate, Los Altos is the 3rd most, I don't know how to say it, had the 3rd highest percentage of residents that are using their bikes to get to work. And it increased from 1.4, I think, to 2.7 within a 2-year period. So it's That's double what we had before, and most all the other cities are like 1%, so being at 2.7 gives us this thing, and then I think Palo Alto and Mountain View are like 6 and 8, if I had to guess. So, bigger numbers, but anyway,
Bigger cities, too.
yeah. Any other future agenda items? Nope. Then I'm going to adjourn.